right, well, it's a terrific honour to be here. And if this was happening in New Zealand, as it did with my own local university, most New Zealanders would know me as the author of the mother of all budgets. And that was the term used after I delivered my first reforming blockbuster budget of 1991. Well, today can I thank the University of Francisco Marroquin for conferring on me what I will call the mother of all honours. Thank you. It means much to me, not just because it will allow me to catch my children. My children are Dr. Lucy and Dr. Oliver, but they've earned their titles as doctors the hard way. I'm going to have to sing for mine in this inaugural lecture. So let me start on a poetic note. You may know a famous English poet called T.S. Eliot. He's my absolute favourite. And one of his wonderful poems is called The Love Song of J. Alfred Prufrock. And this line that I am about to quote to you has become my life's signature tune. So I quote from the poem, "Do I dare disturb the universe?" I mean, if we think about it, the universe has always been disturbed by two forces, by ideas and by action. Ideas that inspire and the willingness to act on those ideas. That's the typical DNA of any agent of change, and I confess that being an agent of change has been my life's path. For me, there are three great causes in life. There's nation building, there's business building, and then there's the foundation on which everything is built, which is the family. From quite an early age, I had the great privilege to be in a family that encouraged me to reach for the stars, and for quite an early age, I was attracted to the idea of going into politics. I know that sounds kind of curious to a young person, but I wanted to change the world, and I saw politics as the domain where that could best occur. I was determined, rather than being a spectator, and often cynical at that, it was better to be a player than a spectator if I wanted to transform my country's prospects. Not for me, a nation that trampled on economic freedoms, that was the old New Zealand. It discriminated against women and was a pretty closed society. So when I was born in 1950, that was the country that I grew up in. And I was determined from the outset that I would be an agent of change. And so right from the get-go, my reform modus operandi was radical, not incremental, and was driven first and foremost by ideas. The idea of liberty and the primacy of individual choice, that's the stuff which we now know to be the product of astounding growth in the world, that drives the amazing innovation that now advances and liberates citizens all around the world. The idea of creative destruction, some of you may have studied Schumpeter, one of my favorite practical economists. The idea of creative destruction, which is a dynamic constantly at work that needs to be embraced and not resisted. The idea of universal opportunity, the idea that entrenched privilege and vested interests cannot be let to stand in the way of individual effort and aspiration. Those were the ideas that drove me as a young person, as an agent of change, as a reformer. And translating these ideas into action, I formed twin ambitions. I wanted, on the one hand, to help secure a well-performed country, and on the other hand, I wanted to ensure a well-behaved but small state. Those were my twin ambitions. And the key to the performance that I sought was always going to come from policies that put citizens in charge of their destiny. Hence, an agenda that opened markets, lowered taxes, and matched opportunity with responsibility. We needed talent. The talent that I see here was the talent that drives a nation, drives its performance. And we needed talent, both homegrown and from afar. And the talent needed to know that my country, New Zealand, was the place and had the policies that rewarded effort, that treasured innovation, that celebrated success, and success that was increasingly possible on a global scale, but from a local base. And isn't that the miracle of the world in which we live? You can be great globally from a local small base. For me, New Zealand, for you, Guatemala. We needed, as you do, to become a magnet for the creative and the ambitious so that they wanted to work in the country, not just visit and play. What I'm talking about is a change in the DNA. It's a change that was a seismic shift in personal attitudes and aspirations, let alone in public policy. And to achieve this seismic shift took a huge amount of political daring from those charged with reform responsibility. If I had 1 minute with your new president to be inaugurated tomorrow, I would talk about the ideas that should animate his agenda and the daring that he should bring, not just to being a comic, but being a president that presides over a huge transformation here in Guatemala. Because the New Zealand story should give him confidence that such seismic shifts for the better are possible. So often, politicians spend their political capital on preserving a flawed but foul status quo, where the privilege of the few is maintained at the expense of the many. Disappointingly, so often, governments take office and then they kick the can down the road. And when they do summons their reform energy, the measures tend to be piecemeal or incremental. Well, some of you may study science, just as I was a practitioner of politics. And if you know about the law of physics, then I will tell you that the law of physics is replicated in the law of politics. Every action is met with an equal and opposite reaction. So the incentive to be daring is not high. But it had to be done, and we did it. The two waves of reformers in New Zealand in the late 80s and early 90s, for us, daring was a matter of both necessity and choice. Crisis was the imperative for action, yes, but the willingness and the conviction to stake all on the idea of freedom was why we were in politics in the first place. Why preside over a failed status quo when the chance to pioneer in the cause of great public policy presented itself? History will record that while our time in office in the mid-80s and early 90s was quantitatively brief, qualitatively, the flagship reforms which we devised, which were the first in the world, they were driven by moonshoot thinking, they involved a very big bet on our future, and they paid off and have never been reversed. I first came to Francisco Marroquin in 1997. That's almost 20 years ago. And at that stage, the reforms were very fresh. They were very new. They were seen as very radical, and many had suspended judgment, would they work or not. I can tell you now decisively, 20 years down the track, they worked, the reforms stuck, there has been no turning back. Reform, however, is not a one-night stand, which brings me to the forces of disruption, which we so welcome when change brings us vastly better private goods and services. I mean, when I first came here in 1997, there was no iPhone, there was no iPad, there was no Internet of Things, there was no nanotechnology, there was no Uber, there was no Amazon. And when we think now in our daily life as consumers, this abundance of modern life which we celebrate has involved huge disruption. Kodak, the camera firm, has gone out of existence. Nokia almost died in the process, and I'm probably the only one left still to have a BlackBerry. It's got a smart face, but nevertheless, it's still a BlackBerry. That is all the disruption that we just love in our private lives. And why is it? This is the paradox. This is the puzzle. Why is it that we so resist that kind of innovation when it involves changes to the provision of public goods and services? You know, as I say, we treasure the abundance of the internet, the iPad, the Uber, and Airbnb. If we turn to the public sector, we should even treasure more the abundance of well-educated young people, a health system that serves patients and encourages wellness, a pension system that is funded and sustainable, and a regulatory regime that allows 1,000 flowers to bloom rather than suppressing the new shoots. And yet, these domains of public policy have largely escaped innovation because the politicians fear the electoral consequences of any disruption to the entrenched interests. Well, I say those are Berlin Walls, and just as the Berlin Wall fell, literally and figuratively, in 1989, the quest now for your century, for your generation, is to play a part in ensuring that those Berlin Walls fall in education, health, social provision, redistribution, and regulation that strangles the very innovation that we know is going to bring the transformation that we seek. If I go back to the Federalist Papers, look a little north to the US, Alexander Hamilton urged his fellow Americans to decide whether societies of men are really capable or not of establishing good government from reflection and choice, or whether they are forever destined to depend for their political constitution on accident and force. And I hope your new president won't mind my saying so, but he's more or less come to office through accident, social media helped, and force, because his predecessors were jailed. That really is not the best start. I prefer Alexander Hamilton's first injunction, which is to establish good government from reflection and from choice. And what an age to take office, because the new force of the internet, of everything, tangible and intangible, is in my belief, and it's my conviction, that technology is also set to become the game changer in the public domain, despite the policymakers. So just as disruptive technologies will drive the economy on both the supply and demand sides, so too will those technologies empower citizens to demand a transformation in the supply of public goods and services. And many of you have told me your use of social media demanded a change in government. So you've already seen with your own eyes your power as citizens. Likewise, we're going to see a revolution of healthcare and education. So Diana, who is one of your board of governors, told me she's just been at the big tech conference in Las Vegas. And the big thing this year was not about technology gadgets. It's about what technology will do to revolutionize health. You have Facebook, I think about Bodybook. What is that technology going to do to put us in charge of our own health and wellness? It's such an exciting age, and I can't wait for this revolution of choice and ideas to revolutionize health, education, and social provision in particular. And I hope that if I were to come to this stage again in 20 years' time, that will be regarded as business that we have well and truly attended to in the public sector. An analyst friend of mine says that the current disruptive technologies are a powerful force for democratization. As I say, the curative and preventative medicine will rise in accessibility and fall in cost. Education will know no bounds as world-class tuition and pupil-directed learning is available at the click of a button. The state's redistributive role remains a big public policy challenge, but will surely change as demographics demands entitlement reform, labour markets are disrupted by automation, and interventions involve investing in opportunity rather than locking in dependency. It's a kind of a scary thing. I walked into Gabriel's office yesterday, and he is sitting on the book he must be reading. The first book I saw was The Era of Robots and what it's going to do for the world of work. The disintermediation of jobs. So much will be automated. Some say that only 16% of the future population will be, in fact, driving the growth and earning the income. When you look at jobs that will be disintermediated, accountants, lawyers, probably not politicians, but I love the list that says the job you most will retain in the future is a personal trainer, because the robot can't do that very well. So we're in for huge change. Hang on to your seats and be part of that change. And as for the heavy-handed regulation that seeks to protect vested interests, look at what the sharing economy is doing to rewrite and liberalise the rules. You know, we've installed a new government, but arguably the installation of Uber is going to unlock regulation even faster than a government can. So let me end on this note. I opened with my quote from my favourite poet. Let me finish with a song, and I really would like to have played this to you, but we've got the technology under control now, so I won't tempt it even further. There's an Australian rock band called Midnight Oil, and as it happened, they're fronted by a singer who went on to forge a somewhat rocky political career. But one of the best tracks from the Midnight Oil range is called The Power and the Passion. And if you listen to that song, download it, the song scolds people for wasting away paradise. It talks of the temper of the times. It warns that sometimes you have to take the hardest line. It urges a willingness to follow what you believe is true, and most of all, celebrates the power and the passion in us all. My life has been about combining power and passion to change the game for my nation. My experience gives me the optimism to preach to you today as I receive this great honour, the possibilities that the ideas of freedom, that individuals of daring can transform the environments and institutions in which they live and work. May the power and the passion be with you. Thank you.